So we finally return to Rav Shimson, Rapheal, Hirsch, and HOREB. We've been learning Hirsch, but we've been learning it based on yearly events, the 3 weeks, and Tisha B'Av, and the 9 days. Now we return to page 40, and we're going to talk about Gaiva and Anav, pride and humility. And he begins the chapter with a quote from Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 8, verse 2. Beware lest you forget that the Lord your God beware lest you forget the Lord your God in not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes, which I command you this day, lest when you have eaten and you're satisfied, and have built goodly houses and dwelt therein, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and your gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart is lifted up, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you forth out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, who led you through the great and dreadful wilderness, the Midbar, wherein there were serpents, fiery serpents and scorpions, and thirsty ground where there was no water, who brought forth water out of a rock of flint. By the way, it's very important here we say rock of flint, because there are rocks that contain water. You may find that strange, but for instance, limestone is like a sponge. It's very porous and it can hold water. So the rock that Moshe Rabbeinu chose at the end, right, was actually a hard, solid rock, one of flint, and that's why it says flint. Who brought you forth water out of a rock of flint, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers knew not, and who might make you humble, that he might prove to you to do your good at your final end, and that is to say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand has gotten me this wealth. That's the danger. When all this happens, will you say in your heart, it's me, my power and the might of my hand brought me this wealth, this success. But you should remember the Lord your God, for it is he that gives you the power to get this wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. It's easy today, as you stand on the shore of the Jordan, and you're still eating manna, and everything is there for you, and you remember the events that happened to you, to you and to your parents. As you went through the desert, and all the miracles happened. But now, life is going to seem to become a little bit more normal. You'll plow the land, you plant the crops, they'll grow, you'll harvest, and you'll say, I'm doing all this. It's me. Right? And you'll forget. And when you forget, that's the danger. We talked about this just before Tisha B'Av, growing old. And Hirsch says, be not Gaiva, be not proud. Never look upon anything and call it your own. Neither your possessions, nor your bodily strength and good looks, nor your intelligence and the abilities. But always remember, it is not you who have procured these things for yourself, but God who has lent them to you. Very interesting word.
Isn't lent?
Lent them to you, not given them to you. That's right. Lent them to you, that it is he alone who you have to thank for them. Nay, more, that he is still master of them, although you call them yours. Think of this and beware of pride. So, in this chapter, which is a relatively short chapter, really Hirsch is going to tell us, Rav Hirsch is going to tell us, many very deep secrets, deep sods of how to live your life, not just to serve God, but that the service will be to your benefit. Interestingly enough, there are some secrets, and there are secrets that have seen Jews through the most difficult times and brought them through, just as he brought us through when he split the sea from us.
Sure.
Right? Brought us through many difficulties. We're now going to see some of the deep secrets of how to manage this world. Everything comes to man from the hands of heaven: strength, wealth, health, cleverness, beauty, and all other good things which man enjoys, and only one thing is in the hands of man. Only one thing, is in the hands of man, and this we have control of. And that is the awe of God, the fear and the awe of God. The performance of one's duty with everything which God lends for that purpose. Will you pride yourself on something which is not yours, and which you possess through no effort of your own? Verily, the more God's blessings are showered upon you, the more ought you to feel God's greatness and your own littleness. It's an amazing idea.
Yeah.
Because normally when we have success, we feel bigger.
Yeah.
But what Hirsch is saying, this is the time for anaf, not for gaiva. When God gives you great things, it's the time to recognize your smallness and God's greatness. The more you acquire, the less you are. The more you have, the smaller you are. For your duties increase, while your merit, on the contrary, diminishes. What does it mean?
Yeah.
So, take a person who is a poor man. Poor man. He has the mitzvahs to do. But his tests are tests of survival and tests of emunah. Let him win the lottery and be worth $50 million. Now his tests change. And from God's point of view, these tests are much greater. Now, those of us who are not wealthy might say, give me that test, God. But we shouldn't joke about it. We shouldn't joke about it. Because we should understand that that person who won the $50 million can destroy his life with it. Destroy his life with it. Suddenly, relatives that he didn't know come out of the woodwork. People who everybody needs everything. And suddenly his attitude, which was a very positive attitude, becomes very cynical. And he may say, none of them deserve it. Right? So what to do with it then? Because what's happened is his responsibilities, his duties have increased. So a man of power, a man of fame, a man of influence, I say man or woman, right? In each case, right, their duties and responsibilities increase over someone without those benefits. Right? And because God is overpaying them in a sense at this point, they have become smaller. They've actually become smaller, not bigger. Right? Because the gifts that God gives them are so great that relative to it, they're a smaller person. So this is a very interesting concept. Survey your life. Remember the benefits which God has bestowed on you and your people. Imagine your life without God's protection and kindness, and behold, without the protection of God, the stage of every human life is as much a midbar, a wilderness, today as it was once for our fathers in the desert itself. A wilderness where every step threatens danger and death, and only from heaven comes protection and manna for food. Remember, the Jews who were traveling for 40 years in the wilderness, had you been outside the Inanei Kavod, outside the clouds of glory. You could have been bitten by scorpions or snakes. You would have had tremendous heat and thirst. You would have been attacked by bandits much greater and more armed than you. But within the uncovered, you were in a complete climate-controlled environment.
All the time.
Right, all the time. There were no hills, there were no valleys, there were no dangerous animals. There was a rock that gave water whenever you needed it. Every morning you looked outside your tent, there was the meals for the day. It was an amazing thing. And what did you do? You would meet with your Rabbi on a regular basis, Moshe Rabbeinu, you know, and he would tell you, you know, God told me this, I'm telling you that. Right? It was like heaven on earth, and yet it was in a desolate and dark and evil place, but the Inanna covered, surrounded the people. They were at the Hilton. For sure. I don't mean to do advertising for any particular brand of hotel. So we have to remember ourselves, right, that we live in that. We live surrounded by an Inanna covered. Understand? But will you be proud on this account, proud towards those who are less rich, less learned? Who is it then who had to give you the strength and opportunity, the blessing, in order that you might acquire the wealth and knowledge? Is it not but God Himself? Do you rely on the uprightness, justice, and the love which you have practiced? Count your good deeds, but count also the benefits you have received from the hands of God. Count also the duties which God can require of you. Can you point to one good deed through which you have done anything more than fulfill only a small portion of your duties to God? To God, to whom you owe everything, who had already conferred benefits on you long before you could recognize them, much less repay them, and who at every moment showers new kindness on you. Do you not perpetually remain in debt to God's goodness, even if you have done everything? Are you not in debt even for this blessed task of striving after God to which He has summoned you? And will you be proud? After all, I go to the trouble of keeping kosher. You know?
Yeah.
I'm a kosher guy.
Yeah.
Wait a second. It turns out eating bugs is not a great idea. You know, parasites are not the best thing for a human to eat. It turns out you're not doing God any favors by keeping His laws.
Yeah.
You know, I wash my hands when I leave the washroom. In the morning when I wake up, I wash my hands. You know, once there was a thing, it was called the Black Death, bubonic plague. And they said the Jews conspired, they poisoned the wells. It wasn't that. They kept the mitzvahs. When the rest of the world didn't believe in cleanliness, right? The Jews were washing their hands constantly. What do they tell you now in flu season?
Wash your hands.
Wash your hands. Wash your hands.
Go to those booths there.
Go, clean your, right?
Soap.
This was the nature. Every time a Jew leaves the washroom, he must ritually wash his hands after they're clean. Every time he eats a meal, he must ritually wash his hands after they're clean. Right? And there are other occasions in which at the end of the meal he washes his hands, and also there are other occasions when he washes his hands.
It's interesting that you're saying the Jews in general, from the Black Death, completely, or a lot less than
they didn't die at the same rate that others did. There were deaths. I'm not saying that they were immune from it completely, because it was an airborne disease as well. But the fact of the matter is that their hygiene
was so much better,
prevented them, and also they didn't socialize with their non-Jewish neighbors very much, and so it was less likely that they would get this disease if their own people didn't have it.
Sure.
Needless to say, if it got inside a community, that community could suffer terribly from it as well. But my point is, why are we washing our hands? Who are we doing a favor to? Right? So Hirsch's point here is that not only do you benefit from all the gifts that you get from God, that we recognize, whether it's your parnasa, your children, whatever it is that happens to your good fortune, even though you don't understand how it all came about. Right? He's saying those things which you think are not gifts, those things that you're required to do, never mistake, they themselves are gifts too. You know, when the doctor says, if you don't get this inoculation, you could get sick. So you take the inoculation, but it actually hurts. Someone sticks a needle in your arm, it hurts, right? The fact of the matter is that those things that God requires of us, right, are in them of themselves a benefit. In and of themselves a benefit. If you daven every day, it is a kind of medicine itself for the soul and for the mind, and will make you feel better.
Can you point to one good deed through which you have done anything more and fulfill a small portion of your duties to God?
No, we did that.
Yeah.
Are you not in debt for this blessed task of striving after God, for doing the mitzvahs after God to which He summoned you? And will you be proud? Truly, if you have done everything, if you are really good through and through, that is just when you will not know the feeling of pride. If throughout your life you had felt yourself to be an Eved of Hashem, a servant of God, if you had labored as a servant of Hashem, if you had felt the blissfulness of self-service, and in His bliss had striven upward towards God and loved Him as one without whom you are nothing, being something only from Him and through Him and with His support, both you and your deeds, would you know anything of pride? If you became proud at that moment, who would so far as lies in you? If you became proud at that moment, you would, so far as lies in you, rob all the previous achievements of your life of their value. The moment you say to yourself, I keep the mitzvahs, I eat kosher, I don't drop in Shabbos, I'm a good Jew. At that moment is gaiva, is pride. When you should have honor, when you should have humility. For what would they be if they were not done with the intention of serving God? But above all, at that moment, that very moment, you would open the door to sin, to chet, and would deprive yourself of all capacity for good deeds in the future. For in pride you become careless, and unnoticed the beast in you takes you by surprise and breaks loose from his chain, and forthwith in pride and selfishness awakes, and you step out of the choir of God, worshippers, and become an idol unto yourself.
Whoa.
This is a key thought.
It's very true.
An absolute key moment is that pride waits for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the moment you make pride your issue, I accomplished this, I did that, I did this, right? You know? I brought this Jew close. Right? You did? Who gave you the tools? Who gave you the teachers? Everything is borrowed. When Hirsch says Lent, he means exactly that word. It's Lent. It has the stamp of the owner on it, and it's not your name. It's the name of God. And that's the beauty of it. Because what fork would you want to use most? The fork of the king or the fork of the peasant? Mm-hmm. Right? Would you rather own a lead utensil or be able to use for life as a gift from the king something of sterling silver? Right? And when we make a bracha, we make these things our own.
Yeah, we're thanking Him, brother.
You know, it says that when you pull an apple off the tree and you eat it, it's a kind of theft. Because God grew that apple, created that apple with His water and His sunlight, and all the things that nurture it came from God. But He actually grew it for you. But all he wants is for you to recognize that, and then it's not his apple anymore, it's yours. And how much more so we learned just yesterday at the Siyum Shas, a very moving event, that when we say Birkas Torah, the blessings of the Torah, we acquire the Torah, God's Torah at that moment. So it's very important to say those blessings, because every day we acquire the whole Torah when we say those brachas. Be aware of pride. Sin has no greater friend than pride. It was pride which, along with lust, caused the first human beings to sin.
Whoa.
Which made them take the liberty, like gods, of determining for themselves what was good and what was evil. What did the Nachash, the snake, say to Eve? So that God doesn't want you to eat from the apple. Why? Because you will have knowledge of good and evil. You will be God. You'll be like God. Right? This was, okay, I'm ready for this. I'll take a bite and I'll go. Right? This is pride. It was pride, the pride of possession, which led Cain to murder his brother. He felt bad that what he gave, which wasn't of the best of his, was rejected. Right? He was offended. It was pride, the pride of possession, which led mankind to the Tower of Babel. We will do battle with God. We will build from a valley into the heavens. That's our pride. For mankind to babble, to deny God and to deify themselves. It was pride, the pride of possession, which along with the love of pleasure caused our fathers in the land of God to forget the laws of God, and so deprived them of the prosperity which had made them this pride, made them proud.
In the first place.
It is pride which even today must precede every sin. For can you, in a moment of sin, still reflect on what you are misusing is not yours? And if you could think of it, would you still misuse it? It's mine. I'll do with it what I want. You know, how many children do you say, who made you the boss of me? Who made you the boss of me? Right? What are they saying? They say, I don't know. I'll decide how to play with this ball, with this toy. Right? It's mine. You're not the boss. It's mine. And when we do that, right? But what if someone says, by the way, you're not upsetting me. You see that big kid over there? It's his football. Maybe you're not going to misuse it so much, right? You might even bring it back to him at that point and say, can I use your football? Pride and pleasure seeking are the begetters of most sin. Pleasure seeking makes you desire what is evil, and pride impels you to do pride impels you to work for that which is evil in spite of the divine prohibition. Therefore, beware of gaiva, of pride. So he's pointing out a two-pronged problem. Right? The desire for pleasure alerts one to something that you shouldn't do. And then your pride says, this doesn't apply to me, this prohibition. It's for somebody else. I can handle this. It's okay. Right? I'll be fine. Instead of gaiva, of pride, make modest humility your characteristic, the genuine humility, anaf, which feels itself really dependent on God with all that it has, which looks upon itself, anaf, humility, as poor and as rich only in God. Because I'm on the right team, I'm rich. And therefore regards everything as being a means lent to it for carrying out God's will. This is the humility which recognizes itself as having presented to the world, and not the world as having been presented to itself, in order that it may bring to every creature with which it comes into contact as much blessing as God lends its strength to produce, and therefore sees in this only in it sees in this its only claim to existence. Why do I exist? Because I dress well? Because I drive a good car? Because I have servants? I exist because God gives me the tools to exist. The miracle of life, of breath. But more than that, the ability to read, the ability to see, right? The ability to lift up and put down, the ability to think. Right? These are things that are given each one individually, moment to moment, by God. And as soon as we recognize that, we take ourselves out of the picture and say, why did God do this? And why did this in order that we could serve? It's a social contract between us and God, so to speak. Right? And the benefits of that service are the joy of life. You know, many years ago, Rabbi Breitowitz, in discussing the subject of the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as granted by the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence in the United States, pointed out that in the Torah, this idea of rights doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. The Jew has no rights. What does he have? He has obligations. 613 are listed, and there are more than that, right? He has obligations. What kind of world is this? A yoke of Torah. Where's the pleasure? Where's the fun? That is the trick. The trick in all of it is joy doesn't come from fun. Pleasure doesn't come from, the excitement of the moment. Right? Joy, pleasure, fulfillment comes from the obligations, comes from fulfilling the obligations. This is where the pleasure of life comes from. And we should know, therefore, that the obligations themselves are a gift. They're not a thing. And by the way, as has been pointed out many times, the idea of a yoke, we can perceive it as something that is very negative. That, it's this piece of wood on the back of the bull that he pulls when he's in. No, think about the alternative. Suppose you hitch the plow up to a rope and put it around the bull's neck, the cow's neck. Said, okay, now pull the plow. Right? What would happen? The cow would choke to death. The purpose of the yoke of Torah, right, is to harness that tremendous power without harming, to do good. That's really what it's about. And that's true of all the mitzvahs. This humility, which recognizes itself as having been presented to the world and not the world as being presented to itself, in order that it may bring to every creature with which it comes into contact as much blessing as God lends its strength to produce, and therefore sees in this its only claim to existence. Hence, it is poles apart from the false humility, which in order to avoid the need for doing something feels itself faint and sinks feebly into sluggishness. So depression can be a form of pride.
Depression?
I can't do anything. I'm too small to do anything.
Yeah,
I'm too small to do anything.
That is a form of pride.
On the contrary, because it recognizes the claim of all beings on itself and knows only this claim, it rouses itself with redoubled strength to beneficent activity, and it reaches its crowning point in chassidut, in that noble love which is nothing for itself and all for others. Chassidut is used here not in terms of a Hasidic movement, but the idea of a chassid is somebody who goes beyond the letter of the law to accomplish the spirit of the law. Of course, keeping the letter of the law, but going beyond it. That noble love, which is nothing for itself and all for others, and foregoing even its legitimate rights, obligations, devotes itself utterly and completely to the general good. It is also poles apart from that false chasidus, which, unlike the true one, instead of immersing itself in life and being everything for others withdraws from life. And while being nothing for itself, it's also nothing for others, and leaves others to be for it. What does it mean? So there are many religious and mystical beliefs that say man should be alone, ascetic, not married, live on a mountaintop, meditate his whole life. We say absolutely not. This is a false Hasidus. Hasidus doesn't require us to spend all our time separated from the world in meditation. It requires us to be immersed in the world, to do kindness, to love justice. These are things that cannot be done when you're separated from your fellow man. The greatest man who ever lived became such an honor that this is the only one of the great qualities of Moshe Rabbeinu which Scripture praises.
That's interesting.
This is an amazing thing, right? Why did they say that Moshe Rabbeinu was a genius?
Yeah.
He was a genius.
It doesn't
Why
say
didn't
that.
he say he was an honest judge of the law? Why doesn't he talk about his wisdom, his kindness, his concern, his leadership qualities? That in the face of tremendous adversity, his courage to go to Paro. Hey, you, Paro, right? I'm here to take your whole industry away.
Yeah, that's right.
Because God, who you don't recognize, said so. Courage! Chutzpah!
Chutzpah. That's it. What chutzpah?
No mention of it. One quality. Moshe Rabbeinu was an Anak Moed, a very humble person. This is his description. This is the only one of the great qualities of Moshe Rabbeinu which the Torah itself praises. David HaMelech too, who was never vindictive and who devoted his whole life, both in thought and in deed, to his people. It says that he used to wake up at midnight, that a harp would be plucked by the wind. And he would wake up at midnight and figure out, how do I care for my people? David came from the tribe of Yehuda. The capital of Yehuda is a very famous city. We call it Bethlehem.
Oh.
But the Hebrew name for it is Beit Lechem. Beit Lechem. Do you know what this means?
Beit is, what does it mean?
Beit is a house.
Yeah.
And
Lechem.
Lechem min haaretz. What's the bracha we say over what?
Of bread.
Of bread.
Yeah.
Over challah, right?
Yeah.
So, Beit Lechem is the house of bread.
Oh, wow.
The capital of the tribe of kings of Israel was not called the house of swords,
house of bread,
the armors, the house of bread, because what is David HaMelech, who is really the design of what a king should be? What was his concern? The welfare of his people.
Bread keeps them on.
That they would be fed, that they would be comfortable.
Neat.
He devoted his whole life in thought and deed to his people. Is an example of Hasidus in practice. Acquire Anav, and you cannot sin.
Wow.
Acquire true humility,
You can't sin.
and you cannot sin.
Wow.
This is actually the secret of life. Those people who want to clarify their lives, who want to avoid sin, who want to avoid doing the wrong thing, it's not you have to move mountains. You have to, it's quite simple. Understand everything you get comes from the hand of God to you. It doesn't mean diminish yourself in the sense of think, I am nothing, I'm lowly. That's an expression, right? Expression. It's a famous story in the yeshiva. Most of yeshiva where people spent the time examining their traits, and a young man comes into the yeshiva and people davening, and during the davening he keeps hearing the same thing over and over. I'm nothing, I'm nothing. Okay, he understands. This is the minhag of the place. The next day he's davening. Guy turns to him and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm nothing." He says, "You think it's so easy to be nothing? We devote years here to become this."
Years
right?
to be
It's
nothing.
not, you don't,
It's hard to be nothing.
it's the reverse of what we think. We devote
Sure.
years to build ourselves up. Here they were devoting years to understanding the greatness of God
Yeah.
and their relationship to the greatness of God. Right? So the point that Rav Hirsch says, and we'll close on this thought, is he says, if you want to avoid sin, develop an understanding and awe of the greatness of God and your relationship to it, as opposed to, heaven forbid, the worst, right? Which is the smallness of bittul Hashem, reducing Hashem, and inflating yourself. That is a sure road to sin. So stay with anav, avoid gaiva. Stay with humility, true humility. Know that you have talent. Know that you have great gifts, but know where they come from. And use them for the right purpose. And sin will be avoided. And this is a very important concept to take forward towards Rosh Hashanah and towards the month of Elul. That we should find our ways to analyze that which we need to correct and correct them. That we should enter Rosh Hashanah, with a clean slate. And that we should this year, this Rosh Hashanah, we should be together with all Klal Yisrael in Israel with the base of Mikdash rebuilt,
Mashiach
and Mashiach. Amen.
Amen. Excellent.